Hey folks, I just wanted to share this really interesting and important update about a new law that was just signed by the governor, passed in New York, protecting tenants during this COVID-19 period that have been affected in terms of being unable to pay the rent. And this law is basically known as the Tenant Safe Harbor Act. Protects a lot of tenants or people that are worried about being not able to pay rent during this time period of coronavirus. I know things are getting back to a little bit of normalcy, but there's still a lot of restrictions all throughout New York City and throughout the state in terms of opening up. And basically, this law protects tenants from eviction in non-payment proceedings where the tenant says, I can't pay because I lost a job or I faced a financial hardship. Tenants can raise that as a defense and stop the eviction from happening, and the courts have to consider this as a defense. So this is something that just got passed. You know, there's general concern about anxiety in New York City, especially with the number of people that have been unemployed, laid off, and unable to make rent payments. So now your landlord can no longer evict you on the basis that you didn't pay rent. So this is really significant in terms of being able to be asserted as a defense. You know, we did go through a global pandemic, and some of that's still going on. And I can imagine, I know for a fact that when the courts do start getting back to normal, there's going to be tens and thousands of tenants worried about being evicted. And, you know, the moratorium that was put in place by the governor really wasn't going to do much. And a law needed to be passed, and the law did get passed, which says that if you are a tenant who has been affected by coronavirus in terms of their employment or other financial hardships that you faced, you can raise that as a defense in a non-payment case. So if your landlord takes you to court and say, hey, if you haven't paid 4 months rent, you got to pay the rent or you're going to get evicted. You can say, I was affected by COVID-19, faced financial hardship, and I can demonstrate it as well. And the judge can block that eviction from happening. And then, you know, the landlord's going to be like, well, what's my remedy? What can I do? How do I protect myself? You know, so one of the things that the law says, this new law says, is that the landlord may just get a money judgment. You know, so he can't evict you on the basis of that judgment, but he can get a judgment and he can docket it with the clerk. And essentially that's the effect of what they can do. And, you know, with a judgment, you have time to pay it over time to the landlord. But the most critical thing is that the landlord can't evict you and say that I'm evicting you because of non-payment of rent. You know, that's something that's so critical and important. And, you know, this law does something to help all the, you know, probably, you know, in the tens of thousands of numbers of people that were laid off, and maybe, who knows, hundreds of thousands that have still not been able to get back to normal, that still can't pay their rent payments. They have this protection to protect them from being evicted as a defense. Now, you know, my personal thought is that I don't know if it's going to be enough, because a judgment is still a bad thing. It goes on your credit. You know, it may prevent you from getting rental in the future. So I don't know if it's the best thing overall for tenants, but at least it's something to stop eviction proceedings from happening. And, you know, I know my partners and I have been discussing what's going to be the court situation in terms of housing court and evictions. How are they going to proceed? And really, tenants have been anxious. A lot of tenants have called our law office and asked, how do we protect ourselves? What can we even do? And some landlords have also asked, like, can we start evictions because the tenant hasn't paid 4 months rent going back from March? And, you know, we tell the tenants that, you know, this law raises a defense to any non-payment eviction case that gets started. And to landlords, we tell them that, look, you can start a case. The only thing you can do is, if it's a non-payment case, you won't be able to evict the tenant, but, you know, you can get a money judgment, and the money judgment will help you at least get that tenant to pay you some money over a period of time. Really, the focus of the law was to protect tenants during this period in New York. And, you know, in Brooklyn, I've had so many people call me, and even tenants reach out to me, and clients asking about what their rights are. And the law's been changing a lot in terms of the last couple of weeks, through executive orders and now through this law that just got implemented. So, the key points, again, it's from that period of COVID-19. And, the definition of that starts at the earliest of March 7 until a date upon which none of the provisions that closed or otherwise restricted public or private business or places of public accommodation. So all the restrictions that we see in place right now, we're still in that COVID-19 period. And we don't know when that period's going to end. That period could end maybe in August or maybe some other time in September. We don't know. Or they may continue that period of time. So these protections for tenants will go from March 7 up until that future time period, which we don't know when it's going to end. So what happens if you have a landlord who starts a case, or you're a landlord who wants to start a case against a tenant? So you can start a non-payment case. You just won't be able to evict the tenant as a result of that non-payment action. That's really critical in terms of how it protects a tenant. So the tenant can raise it as an affirmative defense. And the defense the tenant says is that I have faced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19. So, the law is really particular about how broad it allows the financial hardship to be. So New York City judges or New York State judges that encounter landlord-tenant matters, they can look at a whole variety of factors in terms of what those defenses are. So I'll give you an example that I could see making a good argument. Let's say you were working full-time at a restaurant and the restaurant, started only doing delivery. But the restaurant still employed you as a tenant, as an employee. But clearly they were like, hey, you're going to have to take a pay cut. Instead of $1,000 a week, you're going to have to take like $600 a week. So you're still employed. So you could still say that I was affected. I faced a financial hardship because my money went down in terms of what I was making. And I just didn't have extra money to pay the rent. And you can't evict me. And the judge would have the authority to look at that factor. There's some people who probably didn't lose their job, but they were still financially affected because somebody else in their house who was contributing, or they had a roommate who was contributing. That person also stopped paying them money, so they couldn't pay the landlord. Those are also things that they could look at. Or their savings were dwindling down, and even if they were working, the money they were paying was going all towards rent, but they were using money and their savings dwindled down. So the judges have that ability to look at different factors, and that's really critical in terms of using that as a defense to stop a non-payment eviction. And the only outcome the judge has is basically to give you a money judgment to the landlord, and that's what the courts are going to be looking at and trying to how to implement this law and how to look at the factors detailed within this law. Now, some landlords have said to me that, well, this person was behind rent like 6 months before even March, so can we evict on that basis? And technically they could. They could on the basis of the money that was owed prior to that. So, you have to look at, how does it protect a tenant? It's not 100% protection, but it's some protection to an extent. And at the same time, the law is trying to be balanced to try to give landlords some rights as well in terms of protecting them. So that's all. I just wanted to share this and hope everybody's safe and healthy. Thank you.